All right, moving on now, we're going to go to the segment that's going to take up the bulk of our show here, and that's our 2012 predictions. Now, whether or not Matt and I were doing this podcast, we would probably be making our predictions as we've picked the record for every single team since probably we were in grade school, I would think, at least the last 10 years. We'll always make our predictions for not only our division standings, but also the playoffs, and then we see if we're correct. I don't think I've ever been correct with my Super Bowl pick, quite honestly. I think maybe once. I think I picked the Patriots in '03. Might have been the only time, but we're going to go into that right now, and let's go division by division, Matt, and let's save the best for last, I guess, for the Green Bay Packers. Let's start with the AFC, and let's start with the AFC North. Now, obviously, that division has had three teams, believe it or not, rotating as champions for since the division has existed, actually. But, of course, Cincinnati, the surprise winner Cincinnati was a surprise playoff team last year. Baltimore, the winner last year of the division, and Pittsburgh also making the playoffs. So, looked like a very strong division in 2011, although Pittsburgh, due to injury, and Cincinnati, due to, I guess, inexperience, kind of faltered towards the end of the season. Baltimore was a Wisconsin Badger Lee Evans drop away from Super Bowl 46. So, Matt, I guess I'll let you start. AFC North, what do you think is going to happen there in 2012?
All right, well, I think we probably both have the same prediction as far as the last team in the division, Cleveland. I don't think they have much of a chance at probably even winning more than 5 games. Mm-hmm. Pretty weak. I think especially if Brandon Weeden starts at quarterback, that's going to be probably a pretty rough season for them. So I have them at 4, and I actually have Pittsburgh at 3.
Okay.
I know in a past episode I picked them as my team to kind of have a slump this year, and I still feel that way, and they still don't have Mike Wallace signed. They lost some defensive players over the offseason. The run game is bad. Mendenhall is still hurt. And otherwise, I believe Isaac Redman's going to be the regular starter, at least starting the season. I guess I don't think they're getting better. I think that defense is getting old. I think Roethlisberger's a great quarterback, but I think this is a season where they probably end around 7-9 or 8-8, somewhere around there. I just don't see it. And this division as a whole, I think it's been one of the stronger ones in the NFL the last few years, and I'm kind of not getting that feeling from it this year, I guess, personally. Mm-hmm. I have the Bengals at 2, and again, I'm not even completely sold on that either. I think Dalton's a good young quarterback, and A.J. Green was spectacular last year. That defense is pretty solid, I think, good enough to get them to maybe 9-7, 10-6. And then I have Baltimore winning the division, probably maybe 11-5, 10-6, somewhere around there.
Okay, the main thing I agree with you there is I think the whole division is getting weaker. Cleveland, I have in last place. I actually picked them to go 6-10. I think they'll be a little bit better, but they have a lot of really good young talent on defense, so I think they'll be in a lot of games considering how bad the AFC is. When did that happen? I mean, not to sidetrack, but didn't it seem like the NFC stunk for like 10 years, and now all of a sudden it seems like the NFC has about 12 teams that could win the AFC?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when I was going through my playoff predictions before, and we'll get more to that later, but I was thinking about how if any of these teams that I have in my NFC playoffs were in the AFC, I'd probably have them going to the Super Bowl. I'm not sold on really anybody in the AFC right now, but I mean, we'll get more to that, but I completely agree with you there.
Yeah. So I think Cleveland's got some winnable games, so I picked them as 6-10. Here's where I greatly differ. I'm picking the typical Cincinnati playoff follow-up. I think they're going to go 6-10 as well. Marvin Lewis has never been able to show that he can make his teams do it 2 straight years. When nobody's paying attention to him, they sneak up on a lot of people, but same thing has happened on all 3 of his playoff teams. They start out red hot. People are starting to think, wow, the Bengals are a good team. They could do something in the playoffs. Obviously, this was the weakest of the 3 that he's taken to the playoffs. I think they're going to fall a lot. And then I think Baltimore, even though I picked them to be kind of my weaker team, the AFC is just so weak. I can't see how they don't win 10 games. I don't think they'll win more than 10. And I actually think Pittsburgh is going to win the division. They're just one of those teams that every time I want to get rid of them, they come back and surprise me. And now I think they're going to be 10-6 too, so I guess you could flip-flop those. I just say Pittsburgh for some reason I think is going to win the division at 10-6, tied with Baltimore. Honestly, I thought before the injuries that they could have made that New York Giants run in the playoffs last year before everybody on their team seemingly got hurt 3 weeks before the playoffs. So I'm going to go Pittsburgh 10-6, Baltimore 10-6, Cincinnati 6-10, Cleveland 6-10. Okay, let's go to the AFC South now. This division certainly looks different from what you're used to the AFC South looking like. Last year's champions were the Houston Texans. They played Baltimore very tough, won a playoff game for the first time in franchise history. You had the Tennessee Titans, who under Matt Hasselbeck mostly was off and on throughout the year, and then you have Indianapolis now with Andrew Luck, and then you have the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I guess I'll go first for this one. I kind of gave it away with the way I introed this. I think the last place team I think is going to be Jacksonville. I think they're going to be 5-11. Got a new regime in there. Maurice Jones-Drew is unhappy, which seems to be all the time. Their quarterback situation is horrible, but their defense always seems to be okay, and their division is pretty weak. So I'll say they win 5 games. Also at 5-11, I'll put the Indianapolis Colts. I think they'll be able to win some games with Andrew Luck. I would be surprised if Luck isn't decent right away. It seems to be that the college quarterbacks nowadays are very prepared to play in the NFL. It's almost more of a shock if those very early first-round quarterback picks don't contribute right out the chute. I have Tennessee going at 7-9. They want to get rid of Hasselbeck, but he played somewhat decent last year, so I would say they're going to have kind of a quarterback problem, but I still think they're good enough to beat up on Indy and Jacksonville and some of the other weaker teams in the AFC, so I have them going 7-9, and then I have Houston comfortably winning the division with an 11-5 record. Really good offense. With them, it's another deal where I don't see how they don't win this division with that defense and with that offense, but all their key guys, even already in training camp. Andre Johnson is banged up a little bit. Arian Foster has only been around 2 years as a star and has been banged up quite a bit. I'll say Houston wins that division, but I'm not expecting too much of that. I'll get into that later, but I'm not expecting too much of them in the playoffs.
Okay, yeah, I pretty much completely agree with everything you said about the division there. I would probably guess about the same records. I might have Houston finishing a little better, actually, just because of how bad that division is. So Jacksonville and Indy, I agree about 5-11. If that for Jacksonville, I think that they're pretty weak, especially if their best player isn't happy. I think Andrew Luck will win a few games in Indy, probably about 5-11 as well. Tennessee, probably same thing as you, about 7-9. And I would say Houston maybe 12-4.
Okay.
I just think that running game is incredible with Tate and Foster. It was unstoppable last year, and
yeah.
It kind of really depends on Schaub. He's always been pretty good, but hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's never really been as great as people thought he might be. But if he has a good season, they could definitely finish 12-4. I worry a little bit about them losing Mario Williams, but I think the rest of that defense is so good, and I think some of those young guys are really going to step up this year. So I would, pick them to comfortably win that division by at least 4 or 5 games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with most everything you said there as well. All right, let's go to the AFC East now. This division has been pretty much dominated by the New England Patriots over the last decade or so. And then you have some teams like Buffalo who were good and bad last year, same with the Jets, and then the Miami Dolphins, which I forget have played in the league the last 10 years. So let's go over these teams. I think last place I actually have the Buffalo Bills at 6-10. They started hot last year. I told people when they started 5-2 that I'd be shocked if they finished 8-8, and they did not disappoint. I don't understand why they don't seem to understand why a quarterback is important in 2012. So I think they'll go 6-10. Again, the AFC stinks, so I imagine some teams will steal some games from one another. Miami Dolphins, another confusing quarterback situation. There's going to be a lot of different guys. I wouldn't be surprised if they started all 3 of those guys down there this year. So I think the Dolphins will finish 6-10 as well. I think the Jets, by virtue of playing those teams 4 times, will finish 9-7. I don't think Tebow will have much of an impact at all on the Jets' season. They're a good defense. Their offense is good enough to win sometimes. So I think 9-7 is about right for them. And I think New England, although one of these years you'd think they would have to fade somewhat, I just don't think this is going to be the year. It seems like they've stayed at the level they have been at for about a decade, and the rest of the AFC has fallen away from them. So I think by default they'll finish 12-4 as one of the better teams in the AFC once again.
All right. Well, I have the Bills finishing a little better, but I have the Dolphins at the bottom. I think this is one of the worst teams in the NFL.
Okay.
I thought Matt Moore was pretty good last year. I know they finished out pretty good after having a really bad start. So I think if he starts, they have a pretty good chance. But as of right now, I think it sounds like Garrard's the starter.
Mm-hmm.
decent running backs, Daniel Thomas, Reggie Bush, but I don't know any receivers besides, who's it, Devon Bess?
Yeah.
If he's your only receiver that I know, that's probably not good news for you. So I think they'll probably be 4-12. I have the Bills around 8-8. I think they're a lot better than you gave them credit for. I think they have more offensive talent than you gave them credit for. If Fred Jackson stays healthy, you have C.J. Spiller, Stevie Johnson, and the big question mark is Fitzgerald. And they tried to invest in the quarterback position by giving him that contract, but unfortunately it seems, and I think all of us kind of thought when they gave it to him, it seemed kind of premature. He had a few good weeks and finishing out the season pretty poorly. But I think that defense is good enough. I think there's enough talent for them to go 8-8, steal some games, and honestly I wouldn't be shocked if they got the wild card. But my next spot I have the Jets. I think they'll probably finish around 10-6 just because the weakness around the AFC, that defense is still good. I think Sanchez will have a little bit of a bounce back year this year with the extra pressure behind him, and I agree. I don't think Tebow has hardly any effect on the outcome, of any of their games really, unless Sanchez gets hurt. I thought he was a good signing because I feel like he fits that team well in terms of their defense. You saw what happened with the Broncos last year. Their offense wouldn't score, their defense would keep them alive, and then he'd score late. Which this is the kind of defense that could do that. So if anybody can handle having a ball control or a time control quarterback like that just makes plays towards the end of games, it's the Jets. And then I have the Pats finishing first. I agree. It seems like one of these years they're going to fade. Brady's getting older. This defense is always bad. I don't know who their starting running back is anymore. Maybe Stephen Ridley, I think, possibly. I'm not sold on anything besides Brady, but he's been enough to get them, the best record in the AFC countless times, take them to the Super Bowl. So I'm not going to count them out yet either. So I'll say Patriots 12-4.
Yeah, it looks like we're pretty much on line there. Obviously, our opinions on the Bills change a little bit, but let's go to the last division in the AFC, rightfully so, being the AFC West, which about 10 years ago was one of the better divisions in all of football. Certainly not the case anymore. Last place I have, actually who I picked to be the worst team in the AFC this year, is the Kansas City Chiefs. I just have no confidence in this team. I know they went to the playoffs a couple years ago and then got demolished. A lot of their guys got hurt last year, I understand that. But trying to get all those guys acclimated again, three of their four biggest offensive weapons are coming off major injuries. And Castle just never been that impressed with him. You could do worse, but you could certainly do a lot better. So I have them going 4-12, believe it or not. I actually have the Oakland Raiders going 7-9. I think they have a good defense. I expect them to be a little better on offense, having Carson Palmer there a full year. So I think they'll be good. And again, another really good running game. Darren McFadden was banged up a little bit last year, so I think they'll be able to beat up on some of the lesser teams in the AFC and threaten a playoff push, but I think they'll fade away in the end. San Diego, I think, will go 9-7. Pretty much their MO these days. They're good enough to beat the worst teams, not good enough to beat the best teams, so I think they'll go 9-7. And I actually think the Denver Broncos are going to repeat as division champions with Peyton Manning with a 9-7 record. I still think that defense is really good, and I think if they were able to win with Tim Tebow, even with the Peyton Manning that hasn't been in the system and is banged up, I don't see how they don't win enough games to win that division.
I pretty much agree with where you had everybody, except I'm going to swap Oakland and Kansas City. I think Carson Palmer has shown that he's probably not going to get better at this point in time. They lose some players. They don't have Osmo anymore. Obviously, he played for Philadelphia last year. I just don't think there's enough talent for this team, even in a weak AFC. They'll probably pick off a couple of wins, but not good enough to beat anybody substantial. And so I have Kansas City. They're almost the exact same thing as the Buffalo Bills to me. Same team. One good receiver, a good running game, and a quarterback that is good at best, but you don't quite know what you're going to get out of them, and some talent on defense. So I wouldn't be shocked if they go maybe 9-7, but I also wouldn't be shocked if they go 6-10. So I would say they're probably about middle of the road, 7-9, 8-8. Same thing for San Diego, 9-7. Same thing you said. They're good enough to beat bad teams, not good enough to beat anybody decent. And Denver, I have winning as well. If Peyton's healthy, I think they're good enough. That defense looked good, other than the divisional round last year. And I think if he plays, anywhere near how he used to play, they should be able to win this division pretty easily. But I wouldn't be shocked if anybody won this division out of this, just because it seems so weak. So these teams could completely swap around, and I wouldn't be shocked. But I think Denver probably has a slight edge at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that last sentiment you said too. It really, even as bad as I said Kansas City was, that division just is weird. You get a few injuries here and there, and it totally could invert of what I said it would be.